There's a sense that people are somewhat late to the game in addressing the complex challenges that come with Beijing.
Yeah.
But my question is more one of logistics, and obviously you can speak to this. Wars are won and lost on logistics. In your mind, if there were to be a conflict in the South China Sea, would Canada, would the United States, would those parties to the AUKUS agreement, for example, be able to deploy a large amounts of military hardware and people to that region and support them? Because there is a question of whether or not there are enough maritime vessels to support something like that. Where are we in that argument?
That's a phenomenal question, because that's the crux of the question, not only in the Indo-Pacific, but in NATO. The same idea. How do you, we're going to meet the requirements, everybody will next year, in terms of getting the brigades and battalions required into Europe to support the national plans of NATO, but how are we going to supply and sustain those moving forward? How are you going to have the stockpiles? So we talk about domains, and the domain is not just the military domains. We talk about land, sea, and air, but space and cyber, all within the information environment. But what about industry? What about global shipping? What about intermodal transportation? It's to your point of the Indo-Pacific. The fact is, from Vancouver to Tokyo, it's 4,100 miles. That's a big ocean. That's the quickest way via Dutch Harbor. It's 4,100 miles from Vancouver to Tokyo. So that's a long way to cross, and that's about the quickest crossing point. Prince Rupert's a little closer, but in terms of getting resupplies into the Pacific, it's 4,000 miles. So you need the tonnage available to do so. It is a very complex problem. One that my colleague, Commander Indo-PACOM, Admiral Auchterlonie, they're obviously working with and making sure that their forces are prepared in eventualities. I'm not saying talking plans or anything like that, but that is a complex problem. Not only to have the forces there in theater where they can be used, but to be able to support and sustain those. The biggest problem we have, whether it be Europe, whether it be Indo-Pacific, whether it be anywhere in the world, is how you're going to sustain and support. And this is a problem that I don't want to say we've ignored, because nobody's ignored the problem. But if you look back 30 or 40 years, that's the same was in place when we had forward presence in Europe for the Cold War, if you want to go back to then. But in the last 25 years, when we've been operating in different parts of the world against the non-peer. So all of a sudden, your supply chain was secure. Everything was secure. You could move parts in. You could move resupply. You could weapons, ammunition at will. You can't necessarily do that in a contested environment. So you want to talk to contested environments. One is in Indo-Pacific called South China Sea. The second would be the Baltic. How are you going to move into the Baltic in a contested environment? So these are certainly significant military challenges to planners as we try and come to grips with the new reality.
What's the commitment that you need from industry? And I'm literally building the ships, building the vessels.
I wouldn't say it's it's not all on industry. This has to be on nations to have that liaison with industry. So bringing industry along, because it can't be me in a uniform pointing at industry. That's unfair. Industry has done a great job in terms of research and development and moving capabilities forward and really developing some cutting edge stuff. The fact is right now, as nations, as coalition, whether it be NATO, whether it be Five Eyes partners, what do we need to do in terms of developing capacities and capabilities within industry at scale? And at scale is the key.
Right, and at scale, that means industry needs governments to say, this is our commitment.
And bingo. It can't be a short-term commitment, this has to be a long-term commitment.
Timeline, yeah.
So the fact is, if you need to resupply in Europe, you're now seeing, in terms of usage rates of ammunition in the war in Ukraine, those are unforecast. We haven't thought of those usage rates in generations, but those usage rates are underway today. And, it's got to be incumbent upon, governments, our military, giving that requirement to government talking with industry, getting in contracts, long-term contracts to actually resupply, and it's going to cause us to look at our internal supply chains. Do we make this stuff anymore? Do we do this, or have we outsourced to China? Someone? Have we outsourced to someone over the past 40 years or 30 years, and all of a sudden we don't necessarily have the capacity to do what we need to do? And sometimes it's going to cost more. If we want to have that quality and assurance and that effectiveness, is going to actually cost us to make sure we have those capabilities. So it's not, again, I'm not going to blame it on one, it's not industry. The issue is it's got to be us providing the requirement to government engaging with industry to make sure that we have those capabilities in sufficient stockpiles to actually be able to affect any operations.
And also in time.
In time.